Welcome back for letter M, which is going to be Mary. That's the mother of Jesus. Now, I'm going to get into a story here. I'm going to give you my point up front, which is that just because you have an idea, because you've always been told a story looked a certain way, doesn't necessarily make it true. The Bible can speak for itself, and it's very important to let it do that. And so, this is kind of the underlying principle of punk rock theologian. Don't just accept things because you've been told them. Let the Bible speak for itself. Because I learned a nifty thing about Mary by listening to a Messianic Jew preach the story of Christmas. And that was that from his mindset, from his background, from this Jewish mindset, they just assumed all along that Mary was probably Joseph's second wife. That those siblings that we read about Jesus having, there's James and Jude and Joseph and a couple sisters and such, that they assumed that that was with Joseph's first wife. They're probably grown out of the house on their own by the time the whole nativity scene happens, which is why they're not there for it. Joseph and Mary, Joseph is remarrying a new young bride after his wife died, and they go off for the whole census in Bethlehem and such. And the older siblings, probably never even trusted Mary, didn't believe this whole angel story, didn't understand why Dad was believing it, think that she's some young tart taking advantage of him and clearly cheated on him, and then Jesus comes along and they never respected him. You see in the Gospels, they frankly make fun of him early on, and they think he's insane, and it's not until he's, raises from the dead that they go, hey, there might be something to this. But the funny thing about this whole story, the thing that gives some weight to it in my mind, what convinced me, is Jesus on the cross when he looks to John and tells him to take care of Mary and tells Mary to go with John. Because if Jesus was the oldest brother and there were, these other brothers along behind him, that wouldn't make any sense. He never would have done that, because Jesus dying wouldn't mean that he has to find someone to take care of Mom now. That responsibility would fall to the next oldest brother. That would be an obvious thing. I'm not sure Jesus could even reassign that to John if he wanted to, if there was a next younger sibling to take that role. And so that's what convinced me on it. But here's the important thing. It doesn't really matter whether that's right or wrong, whether Jesus' siblings were older or younger, because none of that changes who Jesus is. None of that changes anything that has to do with salvation. It's just an interesting thing. And I've already explained how I see evidence kind of lining up, and this was something that completely changed my perspective. And that's really the big deal. That just because you've always been told that the story looks like this in A, B, and C, doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. You can see things in a little different way. The Bible can speak for itself and shows things, and you see, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is what I've always thought. And that's the key role of the Holy Spirit. That he can explain things. He's the only one that you can necessarily trust. And that's why it's real important to learn to hear from him and recognize. But, just this idea that there can be things that you've always thought. It's a very difficult thing to avoid what's called confirmation bias. That when you already have an idea, when you read it again, you are going to see things backing up that idea. It's so hard to avoid that because it's a natural human thing. But no matter how much you've been told one thing, don't automatically just swallow that. That's why this is called punk rock theologian. The whole punk rock is a nonconformist. It's don't necessarily conform. Because let the Bible speak for itself. Read it yourself. Ask God to explain it, and he will explain the parts that matter. He might not ever explain to us fully whether Mary was a first or second wife, because it frankly isn't important. But things that are important, he will explain. And you need to learn to let him do that, and not trust, the experts out there to tell you what it means. Let God tell you what it means. He's the one that knows.